They were left at a rest stop in the middle of a blizzard by the children they raised for 50 years, but what Merritt and Opal discovered in that snowed-in cabin would make their betrayal look like mercy. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The windshield wipers fought against the snow, losing badly. Merritt gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his knuckles white against the black leather, age spots prominent under the dim light of the dashboard. Beside him, Opal held a thermos of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, her thin fingers wrapped around it like it was something precious, something that might anchor her to a moment that was already slipping away. They were driving north through Montana in late December, following their son Dex's silver SUV up a mountain road that seemed to narrow with every mile. Behind them, their daughters Marlo and Hadley followed in a white rental, headlights cutting through the snowfall like weak accusations. A family vacation, that's what the children had called it. A Christmas getaway to the mountains. One last trip together before the new year. Opal had been so happy when Dex called 3 weeks ago, his voice warm and insistent. "Mom, we want to do this right. All of us together. You and Dad deserve it." She'd cried after hanging up, pressed her palm to Merritt's chest and whispered, "They still love us." Merritt had smiled, kissed her silver hair, and said nothing about the doubt that lived permanent in his gut these days. The phone calls that came less frequently. The grandchildren's birthdays they learned about second-hand through Facebook. The way his children's eyes glazed over whenever he talked about the old days, about sacrifice, about the nights he worked double shifts so they could have what he never did. Now the snow fell heavier. The road climbed steeper, and something felt wrong. Opal shifted in her seat, pulling her coat tighter. She was 76. Small-boned and delicate, with eyes that still sparkled when she laughed, though lately Merritt noticed she laughed less. Her heart condition had worsened over the past year. The medication was expensive. They'd been rationing it, taking pills every other day instead of daily, stretching the bottle as far as it would go. "Merritt," she said softly, "do you think they're really happy we came?" He glanced at her. This woman he'd loved for 53 years, and felt his chest tighten. "Of course, Opal. Why wouldn't they be?" She didn't answer, just looked out at the storm swallowing the world beyond the window. Ahead, Dex's brake lights flared red. The SUV pulled into a rest stop, barely visible through the white curtain of snow. Merritt followed, tires crunching over frozen ground. The rest stop was nothing more than a small parking area, a couple of picnic tables buried under snow, and a bathroom facility that looked abandoned. Merritt put the car in park and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt ominous, broken only by the wind howling around them. He looked at Opal. "Probably just need a break. Stretch the legs." But when Dex climbed out of his SUV, he didn't walk toward them. He stood there, hands in his pockets, 38 years old, and dressed in expensive outdoor gear that still had creases from the store. Marlo and Hadley got out of their rental, both of them avoiding eye contact. Merritt's stomach dropped. He opened his door and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like a slap, wind cutting through his jacket. "Dex, everything okay?" His son turned slowly. Dex had Merritt's build, tall and broad-shouldered, but none of his warmth. His face was stone. "Dad, we need to talk." Opal climbed out, unsteady, gripping the car door. "What's wrong? Are we not going to the cabin?" Marlo, 35 and sharp-featured like her mother but without the kindness, crossed her arms. "There is no cabin, Mum." The words hung in the frozen air. "What?" Opal's voice cracked. Hadley, the youngest at 32, at least had the decency to look ashamed. She stared at her boots, designer things that probably cost more than Merritt's monthly Social Security check. Dex stepped forward, and Merritt saw it then. The decision already made, the rehearsed speech ready. "Mum, Dad, This isn't working anymore. We've talked about it, all of us, and we've decided it's time you figured things out on your own. Merritt felt the earth tilt. What are you talking about? You're a burden, Marlowe said, cold and clinical. The constant phone calls asking for money, the guilt trips, the medical bills we're expected to help with. We have our own families now, our own expenses. We never asked, Merritt started, but Dex cut him off. You didn't have to ask. It was always implied. Every conversation, every holiday, every time we saw you, it was about what you couldn't afford, what you needed, how hard things were. We're tired of it. Opal made a sound like something dying. Her hand went to her chest, fingers splayed over her heart. Merritt moved to her side instantly, arm around her waist. Opal, breathe, just breathe. He looked at his children, these people he'd worked himself broken for, and felt rage building in his throat. You planned this. You brought us out here to abandon us. You'll figure it out, Dex said, already backing toward his SUV. You always do. You're resourceful. You've told us that story 1,000,000 times. We left some cash in your glove box, Hadley whispered, still unable to meet their eyes. And there's a town about 40 miles south. In this storm? Merritt's voice rose. Are you insane? Your mother has a heart condition. Maybe you should have thought about that before you had 3 kids you couldn't afford, Marlowe snapped. The cruelty of it, the calculated viciousness, hit Merritt like a physical blow. Beside him, Opal began to shake. Please, Opal whispered, reaching out toward her children. Please don't do this. We love you. We gave you everything. Yeah, Dex said, opening his SUV door. And we're done paying for it. They moved in synchronized shame, all 3 of them climbing into their vehicles. Engines started, headlights cut through the snow. And then they were gone, driving back down the mountain, leaving their parents standing in a blizzard at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. The silence after they left was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was shocked by what it had witnessed. Opal collapsed. Merritt caught her, his old arms stronger than they looked from decades of labor. He held her against him as she sobbed, her whole body convulsing with grief. He couldn't speak, couldn't comfort her. His own throat was closed, his eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. 50 years. 50 years of sacrifice, of second jobs and missed sleep, of going without so they could have more. He'd worked in factories, on construction sites, anywhere that would pay. Opal had cleaned houses, taken in sewing, stretched every dollar until it screamed. They'd paid for Dex's college, helped Marlowe with her wedding, covered Hadley's medical bills when she'd had her accident. And this was the thanks. Abandonment in a snowstorm. The wind picked up again, vicious and unforgiving. Merritt felt Opal shivering against him and forced himself to move. Come on, he said, his voice rough. Get back in the car. We need to stay warm. He helped her into the passenger seat, then climbed behind the wheel. His hands shook as he turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and caught. He turned the heat to maximum, but the air blowing through the vents was barely lukewarm. Opal stared straight ahead, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. How could they? She whispered. Merritt, how could they do this to us? He had no answer. He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together the way they'd done 1,000,000 times over 5 decades. Her skin was ice cold. They sat there as the storm intensified, snow piling against the windshield, covering the car like a burial shroud. Merritt checked the glove box and found $300 in 20s and a note that said simply, Sorry, it's for the best. $300. That's what their children thought they were worth. He looked at the gas gauge. Half a tank. He looked at Opal, her lips tinged blue, her breathing shallow. He looked at the storm that showed no signs of stopping. They couldn't stay here. The car wouldn't run all night, and even if it did, the exhaust could kill them if the snow buried the tailpipe. They couldn't drive back down the mountain in this weather. and going forward was impossible without knowing where the road led. "We have to find shelter," he said. Opal turned to him, her eyes red and swollen. "Where?" "I don't know, but we can't stay here." He helped her out of the car, grabbing their small duffel bag from the back seat. The children hadn't even let them pack properly, just told them to bring enough for a weekend. A cruel joke, he realized now. They'd never intended for their parents to need more than that. The wind nearly knocked them over as they stepped away from the car. The temperature had dropped into the teens, maybe lower. Merritt wrapped his arm around Opal's shoulders, and they began to walk. They couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The snow fell in thick, heavy flakes that stuck to their eyelashes and coats. Merritt's boots crunched through drifts that were already knee-deep in places. Beside him, Opal struggled with every step, her breath coming in labored gasps. "I can't," she panted after 5 minutes. "Merritt, I can't walk anymore." "Yes, you can," he said fiercely, gripping her tighter. "You're the strongest person I know, Opal. We're going to survive this. You hear me? We're going to make it." But even as he said it, he felt doubt creeping in. They were in their late 70s, stranded in a blizzard, abandoned by their own children. What were the odds they'd survive the night? They pushed forward, following what Merritt hoped was the road, though it was impossible to tell under all the snow. His lungs burned from the cold. His fingers were numb. Opal leaned heavier against him with each step, and he knew her heart was struggling. "Please," he prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. "Please don't take her. Not like this." Then, through the white chaos, he saw something, a dark shape, angular and solid. "Opal!" he gasped. "Look!" It was a cabin set back from the road, nearly invisible in the storm. It was small, 1 story, made of dark wood that had weathered to almost black. The windows were covered with shutters, and the porch sagged slightly, but it was shelter. Merritt half carried, half dragged Opal through the snow toward it. They stumbled up the porch steps, and he tried the door, locked. "Stand back," he said. He was 78 years old, but he'd built houses for 30 years before his body gave out. He knew which part of a door was weakest. He lifted his boot and kicked hard just above the lock. The wood splintered. He kicked again, and the door burst inward. Darkness swallowed them. The cabin was freezing, barely warmer than outside, but at least the wind couldn't reach them here. Merritt pulled out his phone, used its flashlight to scan the interior. The beam revealed a single main room with a kitchenette along one wall, a stone fireplace, and old furniture covered in dust. To the right, a door that probably led to a bedroom. To the left, a small bathroom. "Sit down," he told Opal, guiding her to a couch that smelled like mildew and thyme. She collapsed onto it, curling into herself. Her lips had gone from blue to purple. Merritt moved fast. In the kitchenette, he found cabinets with old canned goods, their labels faded but intact. Under the sink, a stack of old newspapers and some kindling. Beside the fireplace, a bin with firewood, dry and ready. His hands shook as he built a fire. It took 3 tries to get the match lit, but once the kindling caught, the flames spread quickly. Within minutes, heat began to radiate into the room. He found old blankets in the bedroom, musty but intact, and wrapped them around Opal. Then he sat beside her, pulled her against his chest, and held her as the fire grew stronger. She was crying again, quietly now, her tears soaking into his shirt. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Merritt, what did we do wrong?" He tightened his arms around her. "Nothing. We did nothing wrong. We must have. Children don't just abandon their parents. We must have failed them somehow." "No." His voice was hard, certain. "We loved them. We sacrificed for them. We gave them everything we had and more. What they did tonight, that's on them, not us." But even as he said it, he couldn't stop his mind from racing backward through the years, searching for the moment it all went wrong. He remembered Dex at 7, crying because the other kids made fun of his second-hand clothes. Merritt had worked overtime for a month to buy him new ones. He remembered Marlowe at 12, begging for dance lessons they couldn't afford. Opal had taken a weekend job cleaning offices to make it happen. He remembered Hadley at 16, wrecking her first car and being terrified to tell them. They'd sold their wedding rings to pay the deductible so her insurance wouldn't skyrocket. Wedding rings. They'd sold their wedding rings. Merritt looked down at his bare ring finger, at the pale band of skin where gold had once rested. They'd told the children they'd lost the rings, didn't want them to feel guilty, didn't want them to know the price of forgiveness. And tonight, those same children had left them to die in a storm. Opal's breathing began to even out, her body relaxing as the warmth seeped into her bones. Merritt held her and watched the fire, his mind a storm of its own. Who owned this cabin? How long had it been abandoned? Were they trespassing, or had they stumbled onto salvation? The cabin was small but well built. The walls were solid, the roof intact. Snow might be piling up outside, but in here they were dry and warming up. It was more than they'd had an hour ago. "Thank you," Opal whispered against his chest. "For what? For not giving up. For finding this place. For still loving me after all these years." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with wood smoke. "I'll love you until my last breath, Opal, and probably after that too." She tilted her face up to look at him, and despite everything, despite the betrayal and the cold and the fear, she smiled. "You're stuck with me, Merritt Davies. Wouldn't have it any other way." They sat in silence as the fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged on, but in here, in this strange cabin they'd broken into, they were together. And maybe, Merritt thought, that was enough. It had to be enough, because they had nothing else left. Hours passed. The fire burned down, and Merritt added more wood. He explored the cabin more thoroughly, finding canned soup in the cupboards, bottled water that looked old but sealed, even a manual can opener in a drawer. In the bedroom, a double bed with a bare mattress and more blankets in a cedar chest at its foot. He heated soup over the fire using a dented pot he found, and they ate it straight from the pot with the single spoon in the drawer, passing it back and forth. It was tomato soup, maybe 10 years old, but it was hot and it filled their stomachs. "It's like we're kids again," Opal said, a ghost of amusement in her voice. "Remember our first apartment? We had one pot, one spoon, and a hot plate." Merritt smiled at the memory. "And we thought we had everything." "We did," she said softly. "We had each other." They finished the soup and made their way to the bedroom. Merritt piled every blanket they could find onto the bed, creating a nest of warmth. They climbed in fully clothed, boots and all, and held each other as the storm shook the cabin. Opal fell asleep first, her breathing shallow but steady. Merritt stayed awake, listening to her heart beat against his chest, counting each breath like a prayer. His children's faces haunted him. Dex's cold certainty, Marlowe's casual cruelty, Hadley's cowardice. He'd raised them, fed them, clothed them, taught them right from wrong. Where had he failed? Or had he failed at all? Maybe some people were just born with something missing, some essential piece that allowed them to feel gratitude, loyalty, love. He thought about the $300 in his pocket, about their car buried in snow at the rest stop, probably unusable by now, about the medication Opal needed and couldn't afford, about the mortgage payment due on their house in 2 weeks, a payment they wouldn't be able to make even if they somehow made it home. They were 76 and 78 years old, abandoned in the mountains with no way out and no way forward. But they were alive, and they were together. And somehow, against all odds, they'd found shelter. Merritt closed his eyes and let himself sleep. He woke to pale grey light filtering through the shuttered windows. The storm had quieted. Opal was still asleep beside him, her face peaceful. He slipped out of bed carefully and moved to the main room. The fire had died to embers. He rebuilt it, added wood, got the flames going again. Then he went to the window and opened the shutter an inch to look outside. Snow, as far as he could see. It had piled up to the porch railing, maybe 4 feet deep. The world beyond was a white wilderness, beautiful and deadly. They were trapped. No one was coming to rescue them. Their children certainly weren't coming back. And even if Merritt could somehow get to a phone, who would he call? They had no other family. Their few friends were as old and struggling as they were. He closed the shutter and turned back to the cabin. In the daylight, he could see it more clearly. The furniture was old but quality. The stone fireplace was masterfully built. The kitchen, though dated, had solid wood cabinets. This wasn't just some hunter's shack. Someone had lived here. Someone had cared about this place. Why was it abandoned? He walked to the kitchen and opened cabinets at random. Canned goods, all dusty, all dated from the early 2000s. In one drawer, he found old receipts, faded and yellowed. In another, a pile of mail, unopened, addressed to someone named Ellis Ridgemont. Ellis Ridgemont. The name meant nothing to him. In the bedroom, Opal stirred. "Merritt?" "I'm here," he called back. She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her hair wild from sleep. "How long was I out?" "Few hours. It's morning." She came to him, and he wrapped his arms around her. Together, they looked around the cabin that had saved their lives. "We need to figure out our next move," Merritt said. "I know." Opal's voice was steadier than it had been last night. "But Merritt, I need to say something first." He pulled back to look at her. Her eyes were clear, determined. "What they did to us, it was evil. But we're not going to let it break us. We've survived worse." "Have we?" "Yes. We've survived poverty, illness, loss. We've buried both our parents and most of our friends. We've watched the world change into something we barely recognize. And through all of it, we had each other." She gripped his hands. "We still have each other, and that means we haven't lost everything." Merritt felt something crack open in his chest. Tears spilled down his cheeks, hot and cleansing. Opal cried too, and they held each other in the middle of that strange cabin, grieving not for what they'd lost, but for what they'd never really had. Children who loved them back. When the tears finally stopped, they were different, lighter somehow, as if the grief had carved out space for something else, something like resolve. "Okay," Merritt said, wiping his face. "We survive this. We figure out how to get home, and then we build a life that doesn't include them." Opal nodded. Agreed. They spent the morning exploring every inch of the cabin. Merritt found tools in a shed attached to the back, snow-covered but accessible through an interior door. Opal inventoried the food supplies and determined they had enough canned goods to last a week if they were careful. In the bedroom closet, they found men's clothes from the 2000s, expensive brands, still in good condition. In the bathroom, sealed bottles of shampoo and soap. "It's like someone just walked away," Opal said. "Or disappeared," Merritt added. By afternoon, the storm had stopped completely. The sun emerged, turning the snow into a blinding field of diamonds. Merritt knew the temperature outside was still dangerously cold, but at least the wind had died. He was trying to figure out if there was any way to dig through the snow to the road when it happened. He was in the main room, examining the stone fireplace, when his boot caught on something. He looked down. The edge of a floorboard sat higher than the others, just slightly. He knelt and pressed on it. It rocked under his weight, loose. He worked his fingers under the edge and pulled. The board came up easily, too easily. Beneath it was darkness. He grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it into the gap. Bundles, wrapped in plastic, stacked neatly. His breath caught. He reached down and pulled one out. It was heavy, solid. He tore a corner of the plastic. Money, cash, stacks of $100 bills bound with paper bands. "Opal!" he called, his voice strange. "Opal, come here!" She appeared from the kitchen. What is it? He held up the bundle, unable to speak. Her eyes went wide. Is that? Yeah. They stared at each other. Then, moving as one, they fell to their knees and started pulling up more boards. Beneath the floor of the cabin, hidden in the crawl space, was more money than either of them had ever seen in their lives. Bundles and bundles and bundles of it, organized, preserved, waiting. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Merritt and Opal knelt on the dusty floor, surrounded by stacks of money that seemed to multiply before their eyes. The morning light streaming through the shuttered windows caught the plastic wrapping, making it gleam like something from a fever dream. Merritt's hands shook as he pulled up another floorboard, then another. Each one revealed more bundles, more cash, more impossibility. "How much is here?" Opal whispered, her voice thin and breathless. Merritt shook his head. He couldn't count it, couldn't process what they were seeing. He grabbed another bundle and examined it closely. The bills were old but pristine, preserved in their plastic cocoons. The paper bands holding each stack together were marked with neat handwriting. $10,000. 10,000 per bundle. And there were dozens of them visible just in the section they'd uncovered. Opal sat back on her heels, one hand pressed to her chest. "Merritt, I think I'm going to be sick." He moved to her side instantly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Breathe, Opal. Just breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth." She followed his instructions, her breathing ragged but steadying. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "It's real." His voice came out hoarse, strange to his own ears. They sat in silence for a long moment, the bundles of cash scattered around them like accusations. Finally, Merritt forced himself to stand. His knees protested, arthritis flaring, but he ignored it. He moved methodically through the cabin, testing every floorboard with his weight. 3 more loose boards near the kitchen, 2 by the bedroom door, 1 under the couch, each one hiding more money. Opal watched him, still on the floor, her face pale. Someone's going to come looking for this. Whoever hid it, they're going to come back. "Maybe," Merritt said, kneeling by the fireplace. "Or maybe they can't." He pressed on the stones around the hearth, remembering something from his construction days. Old fireplaces like this sometimes had hiding spots built into them. His fingers found a stone that shifted slightly under pressure. He pushed harder. A panel in the wall beside the fireplace swung inward with a click. Behind it was a safe, old-fashioned, with a combination lock, and sitting on top of the safe was a leather journal, water-stained and worn. Merritt pulled out the journal carefully, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. He carried it to the window where the light was better and opened it. The first page was dated January 5, 1986. And the handwriting was the same neat script from the paper bands on the money. "My name is Ellis Ridgemont," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm either dead or in prison, and you found what I spent 3 years hiding. I won't apologize for what I did. The people I took from were wealthy beyond measure, and they earned their money on the backs of workers they exploited. But I won't pretend I'm a hero either. I'm a thief, a good one. And this is my insurance policy." Merritt looked up at Opal. She'd managed to stand and was leaning against the couch, watching him with wide eyes. He continued reading aloud. "Between 1983 and 1986, I embezzled approximately $305 million from Carnegie Financial Group. I was their senior accountant, trusted, invisible. I moved money in ways they'd never detect, at least not until I wanted them to. I bought this cabin in '79, back when land up here was cheap and nobody asked questions. I've been moving cash here in small amounts for years, preparing for the day when I'd disappear. That day is coming soon. The feds are circling. Someone at Carnegie is getting suspicious. I have maybe 3 months before they figure it out, So I'm documenting everything. Where the money is, how much and why I did it. Not for absolution, just for the record. Merritt flipped through the pages. Entry after entry, dated, detailed, methodical. Ellis Ridgemont had kept a ledger of his crimes with the same precision he'd used to commit them. "Listen to this," Merritt said, finding a passage near the middle. "May 23, 1986. Moved another $2 million today. Buried it under the floor near the kitchen. Total now at approximately $290 million. I've been reading about the families whose pensions I destroyed. Can't sleep. Doesn't matter. I'm too far in to stop now. The money is here. I'm almost done. Then I disappear." Opal moved to stand beside him, reading over his shoulder. "Keep going." September 15, 1986. It's over. They know. A junior accountant named Patricia found the discrepancies. Feds will be here within days. I've moved the last 15 million. Total hidden here is 305 million, give or take. I'm leaving tonight. If I make it to Mexico, I'll come back for this someday. If I don't, well, someone will be very lucky. Or very cursed. Not sure which. That was the last entry. Merritt closed the journal and looked at Opal. Her face had gone from pale to grey. He guided her to the couch and sat beside her. $305 million, she whispered. "Merritt, that's—" "I know. We're sitting in the middle of $305 million. "I know." She started laughing. It was a broken sound edged with hysteria. "We can't even afford my heart medication, and we're sitting on $305 million. Merritt wanted to laugh too, but he couldn't. His mind was spinning through implications, through questions that didn't have easy answers. "We need to think about this carefully." "Think about what?" Opal turned to him, her eyes blazing suddenly with something that looked like rage. "Merritt, our children left us to die in a snowstorm. They abandoned us because we were too expensive, too much of a burden. And underneath the cabin that saved our lives is more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. Money that was stolen. From who? A financial group that probably still exists, that probably has billions, money stolen 40 years ago." She gripped his arm. "Merritt, I'm not saying we keep all of it. I'm not saying we keep any of it. I'm saying we need to think about what's right here, not just what's legal." He stared at her. This woman who'd never taken so much as a dinner mint from a restaurant without asking, and saw something new in her eyes. Not greed, desperation. The kind that came from a lifetime of doing everything right and still ending up with nothing. "Let's see what else is in that safe," he said quietly. The safe was old but well maintained. Merritt tried the handle on a whim, not expecting it to open. It did. Apparently Ellis Ridgemont had been so confident in his hiding spot that he hadn't bothered to lock it. Inside were more bundles of cash, these ones larger, marked 50,000 each. Beneath them were documents, bank statements, account numbers, transfer receipts, all meticulously organized in folders, and at the bottom a manila envelope marked Insurance. Merritt opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, and what looked like evidence of other crimes. Ellis Ridgemont had kept records of everything, not just his own embezzlement, but other illegal activities at Carnegie Financial. Bribes, fraud, insider trading. Names Merritt recognized from the news even 40 years later. "He was building leverage," Merritt said, "in case he got caught." "Did he?" Opal asked. Merritt pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping from the envelope, dated November 2, 1986. The headline read, "Carnegie Financial Accountant Dies in Car Crash Fleeing Feds." The article was short. Ellis Ridgemont, 42, had died when his car went off a mountain road in Colorado while attempting to flee federal authorities. His body had been recovered. The $300 million he'd stolen had never been found. "He didn't make it," Opal said softly. Merritt set down the clipping and looked around the cabin with new eyes. Ellis Ridgemont had died trying to escape, and his fortune had sat here for nearly 40 years, hidden, forgotten, waiting. They spent the rest of the morning going through everything. Merritt pulled up every loose board they could find, counting bundles, trying to get an accurate total. Opal went through the documents in the safe, organizing them, creating an inventory. By afternoon, they had a number: 287 bundles at $10,000 each, 43 bundles at $50,000 each, and 52 bundles at varying amounts, mostly $20,000 each. Merritt did the math 3 times to be sure. $304,910,000. Close enough to Ellis Ridgemont's estimate to be terrifying. They sat at the small kitchen table, the journal open between them, surrounded by more money than most people would see in 100 lifetimes. Outside, the snow gleamed in the afternoon sun, beautiful and indifferent. "What do we do?" Opal asked. Merritt rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 78 years. His back ached from pulling up floorboards. His hands were cramped from counting money. His heart was heavy with the weight of the decision in front of them. "We could report it," he said. "Call the authorities. Tell them what we found." "And then what? It goes to the government? To Carnegie Financial? To people who've probably already written it off and collected insurance 40 years ago?" Opal shook her head. "Merritt, I'm not trying to justify theft, but this money has been gone from the world for 4 decades. Whoever it belonged to has moved on. That doesn't make it ours." "Doesn't it?" She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. "We found it, on property we entered to survive, property that might not even have a living owner anymore. We could spend years in legal battles over this, years we don't have, and for what? So some corporation can add it to their bottom line." Merritt thought about Carnegie Financial, looked them up in his mind from decades of news. They'd been one of the big firms, the kind that foreclosed on families during the recession, that paid executives millions while workers lost their pensions. They still existed, bigger than ever, renamed and merged, but essentially the same. "I don't know what's right," he admitted. Opal reached across the table and took his hands. "Neither do I. But Merritt, I'm 76 years old. I have a heart condition that's getting worse. We can't afford my medication. We're behind on our mortgage. Our children abandoned us in a snowstorm. And we're sitting on enough money to not just survive, but to live. Really live. For the first time in our lives, we could stop struggling. We'd be criminals. We'd be survivors." She squeezed his hands. "And maybe we could do some good with it. Help people who actually need it. Not big corporations or government agencies that will just bury it in bureaucracy. Real people," he wanted to argue. Wanted to say that 2 wrongs didn't make a right, that they'd raised their children to be honest, and look how that turned out. But the words died in his throat. Because the truth was, he was tired. Tired of scraping by, of choosing between medication and food, of watching Opal's light dim year by year under the weight of poverty. Tired of being good and getting nothing for it but abandonment and pain. "Let's sit with it," he said finally. "Let's not decide today. We're trapped here anyway until the snow melts enough to leave. We have time to think." Opal nodded, relief visible on her face. "Okay, time to think." They replaced the floorboards carefully, hiding the money again. They put the documents back in the safe and closed the panel in the wall. The journal Merritt kept out. He wanted to read it more carefully, to understand who Ellis Ridgemont had been and why he'd done what he did. That night, they ate another can of soup heated over the fire and climbed back into the bed piled with blankets. Outside, the temperature had dropped again and they could hear the wind picking up, though not as fierce as the night before. Opal fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. Merritt lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind refusing to quiet. He thought about his children, about Dex's cold eyes at the rest stop, about Marlowe's casual cruelty, about Hadley's cowardice. They'd calculated the cost of their parents and decided it was too high. $300. That's what they'd left in the glove box. Beneath the floor of this cabin was 300 million. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Merritt thought about the house he and Opal had bought in 1972, a tiny two-bedroom that cost $23,000 and felt like a castle. They'd worked so hard to keep it. There'd been times they'd lived on crackers and canned vegetables so they could make the mortgage payment. Times they'd kept the heat so low they could see their breath indoors. But they'd kept it. For the children, they'd told themselves. So the children would have stability, a home, a foundation. And now those children had homes of their own, big ones from what Merritt had seen in Facebook photos, and they couldn't be bothered to help their parents keep theirs. He thought about Opal's heart medication, prescribed after her attack 3 years ago. Insurance covered some of it, but the copay was $450 a month. $450 they didn't have. So they stretched it, took pills every other day, gambled with her life to save money. $450 was such a small amount compared to what sat beneath this floor. It was a rounding error. It was nothing, but it was everything. Merritt finally fell asleep sometime after midnight, his mind still churning with questions that had no easy answers. He woke to Opal's scream. He bolted upright, heart hammering, searching for danger in the dark room. "What? What is it?" "My chest," she gasped, both hands pressed over her heart. "Merritt, it hurts." Terror flooded through him. He fumbled for his phone, turned on the light. Opal's face was twisted in pain, her lips tinged blue again. "Your pills," he said, already moving. "Where are they?" "Jacket pocket, in the other room." He ran, or tried to, his old legs stiff and protesting. He found her jacket on the couch where she'd left it, dug through the pockets with shaking hands. The pill bottle was there, orange plastic, her name on the label. He opened it and his heart sank. 3 pills left. They'd been rationing so carefully, trying to make them last until they could afford more. He brought the bottle and a glass of water from the sink. Opal took one of the precious pills, swallowed it, and leaned back against the pillows, breathing hard. Merritt sat beside her, holding her hand, watching her face as the medication slowly took effect. It took 20 minutes before the pain lines around her eyes eased, 30 before her breathing normalized. "I'm okay," she whispered finally. "I'm okay." But they both knew she wasn't. 2 pills left. Maybe 3 days if they were lucky. And then what? Merritt lay back down beside her and held her close, listening to her heartbeat, irregular and fragile. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin, and beneath their bed, under the floorboards, enough money to buy every pill Opal would ever need sat useless and taunting. Morning came grey and cold. Merritt woke before Opal and lay still, not wanting to disturb her rest. He stared at the ceiling and made calculations in his head. $305 million. Even if they only took 1%, that was $3 million. More than enough to cover Opal's medication for the rest of her life, to pay off the house, to live comfortably. They could give the rest back, turn it in, do the right thing with 99% of it. Would that be so wrong? He thought about the people Carnegie Financial had hurt. Ellis Ridgemont's journal mentioned pension funds. Merritt thought about his own pension from the factory, the one that had been restructured in the 90s and cut in half. He thought about friends who'd lost everything in the 2008 collapse while executives got bonuses. The world wasn't fair. He'd known that his whole life. He'd accepted it, worked anyway, tried to be good anyway, and where had it gotten him? Abandoned in a snowstorm by his own children. That's where. Opal stirred beside him. "You're thinking too loud," she murmured. "Sorry." She turned to face him, her eyes clearer than they'd been last night. "I had a dream." "Yeah?" "We were young again, in that first apartment with 1 pot and 1 spoon, and we were happy. Not because we had money, because we had each other, and that was enough." She touched his face. It was enough then, Merritt. I know, but we're not young anymore. We're old and tired and sick, and there's money under this floor that could change our lives. Her voice grew stronger. I'm not saying we keep it all, but Merritt, I'm saying we deserve to survive. After everything we've been through, everything we've sacrificed, we deserve that. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Okay. Okay? Okay. We take what we need. Enough to be secure. Enough to make sure you get your medication, and we keep our house and we can live without fear. And then we figure out what to do with the rest. Opal's eyes filled with tears. You mean it? I mean it. We've been good our whole lives, Opal. We've played by the rules, done what we were supposed to, sacrificed for people who didn't appreciate it. Just once, just this once, we're going to put ourselves first. She buried her face against his chest and cried, not from sadness but from relief. The weight of always being good, always struggling, always going without, finally lifting. They got up and made coffee from an ancient jar of instant they found in the cabinet. It tasted terrible and perfect. They heated more soup and ate it with the single spoon, passing it back and forth like they had 50 years ago. Then they got to work. Merritt pulled up the floorboards again, and they started sorting money. They set aside enough for Opal's medication for 5 years, enough to pay off the mortgage, enough to cover living expenses, emergencies, maybe a few small comforts they'd never been able to afford. They were careful, conservative. When they finished, they'd set aside $4 million. $4 million out of $305 million, just over 1%. What happens next will test their resolve, bring unexpected visitors, and force Merritt and Opal to defend not just the money, but their right to survive. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The rest goes back, Opal said firmly. We'll figure out how, but the rest goes back. Merritt nodded. Agreed. They rewrapped their $4 million carefully, bundled it separately from the rest. They put it in the bedroom closet, hidden behind old clothes. The rest went back under the floorboards, $301 million buried in the crawl space of a dead man's cabin. It was late afternoon by the time they finished. Merritt went to the window and looked out. The snow had melted slightly in the sun, but there was still at least 3 feet on the ground. They were trapped for at least another day, maybe 2. He turned back to Opal and found her reading Ellis Ridgemont's journal, her face thoughtful. What are you reading? His reasons, she said. Listen to this. I know what I'm doing is wrong. I'm not stupid. But I watched my father work 40 years for Carnegie and die 6 months after retirement with nothing. I watched them gut pensions, lay off thousands, and give executives millions. I decided if I was going to hell anyway, I'd take some of their money with me. She looked up. He sounds like you, like us, like everyone who's ever been crushed by a system that doesn't care. Merritt sat beside her. Doesn't make what he did right. No, but it makes it understandable. She closed the journal. Merritt, I've been thinking. When we get out of here, when we figure out how to return the rest of the money, maybe we could specify where it goes. Not to Carnegie Financial, to the people they hurt. Pension funds, displaced workers, families. I don't know if we can do that. We can try. We have leverage. $300 million is a lot of leverage. We can make demands, return it on our terms or not at all. He looked at this woman, his wife of 53 years, and felt something shift. Opal had always been quiet, gentle, the kind of person who apologized when others bumped into her. But something in her had changed. Maybe it was the abandonment, maybe it was the money, maybe it was just finally having enough. Whatever it was, he liked it. You've got fire in you, he said. She smiled, sad and fierce. I've always had fire, Merritt. I just spent too many years letting other people put it out. That night, they ate the last of the soup and made plans. They'd wait for the snow to melt enough to walk out. They'd get to a phone and call for help. They'd get home, get Opal her medication, and then they'd figure out the money. Carefully, methodically, with the same attention to detail Ellis Ridgemont had used to hide it. They went to bed early, exhausted from the physical and emotional toll of the past 2 days. Opal took another pill, leaving just one in the bottle. Merritt held her and tried not to think about what would happen if they couldn't get out before she needed the last one. He was almost asleep when he heard it. A sound from outside. Mechanical, distant, but growing closer. An engine. He sat up, instantly alert. Opal heard it too. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Merritt moved to the window and cracked the shutter. Through the trees he could see headlights cutting through the dusk, a vehicle moving slowly up the snow-covered road. His stomach dropped. "Get dressed, quickly!" They pulled on their coats and boots, hearts pounding. The engine grew louder and then stopped. A door slammed. Footsteps crunched through snow. Merritt positioned himself between Opal and the front door, his hands clenched into fists. He was 78, but he'd protect her with whatever strength he had left. The footsteps climbed the porch, stopped at the door. A knock, firm and official. Then a voice, male, deep and tired. "Hello? Is someone in there? I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to check if the cabin is secure." Merritt and Opal looked at each other. He moved to the door, keeping the chain lock engaged, and opened it a crack. Outside stood a man in his 60s, wearing a heavy coat and a utility company cap. He looked tired, but not threatening. "Sorry to bother you," the man said. "I'm with county maintenance. Been checking on properties up here after the storm, saw the broken lock and wanted to make sure everything was okay." Merritt's mind raced. "We're okay. We took shelter during the blizzard. Car got stranded down at the rest stop. We were freezing." The man nodded sympathetically. "You're lucky you found this place. Storm like that, people die. I can give you a ride back down the mountain if you need. Road's barely passable, but my truck can make it." Relief flooded through Merritt. "That would be incredible. Thank you." "No problem. You folks ready to go now? Supposed to get more weather tonight." Merritt turned back to Opal. She was pale, one hand pressed to her chest again. They needed to get her home, get her to a doctor, get her medication. But $4 million sat in the bedroom closet. "Can you give us 10 minutes?" Merritt asked. "We need to gather our things." The man checked his watch. "Sure. I'll wait in the truck. Keep it running. Warm it up for you." Merritt closed the door and turned to Opal. "We have to leave the money, all of it. We can't carry it without him seeing." "I know." She looked toward the bedroom, then back at him. "Merritt, I don't care. My life is worth more than money. Our lives are worth more. Let's just go home." But Merritt thought about the mortgage payment due in 2 weeks, about the pill bottle with 1 pill left, about the $300 in his pocket that was all they had in the world. And he thought about the $4 million in the closet, their survival fund, their insurance against a world that had already abandoned them once. "Wait here," he said. He moved quickly, going to the bedroom, grabbing their duffel bag. He pulled out their spare clothes and stuffed bundles of money in their place, working fast. He managed to fit 20 bundles, $200,000. Not the $4 million they'd set aside, but enough. Enough for Opal's medication and the mortgage and breathing room to figure out the rest. He zipped the bag closed and returned to the main room. Opal was standing by the door, ready. "I took some," he said quietly. "Not all of it, just enough." She looked at the duffel bag, understanding what it meant, what they were choosing. Then she nodded. "Okay, let's go." They took one last look at the cabin that had saved them, at the floor that hid a fortune, at the fireplace where they'd warmed themselves against the cold. Then Merritt helped Opal out the door and down the porch steps. The maintenance man was waiting in a county truck, engine running, heat blasting. He helped them into the cab, Merritt in the passenger seat, Opal in the middle. "You folks have family in town?" the man asked as he carefully navigated the truck back down the mountain road. Not anymore, Opal said softly. The man glanced at her, seemed to sense there was a story there, and didn't push. They drove in silence as the sun set behind them, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple. Merritt held the duffel bag on his lap and held Opal's hand with his free one, and thought about the choice they'd just made. They were thieves now, technically. They'd taken money that wasn't theirs. But they'd also left $300 million behind, more than 99% of it, and they were alive. Together. Heading home. Sometimes survival required compromise. Sometimes being good meant knowing when to break the rules. As the truck carried them down the mountain, away from the cabin and its secrets, Merritt whispered to Opal, "No regrets?" She squeezed his hand. "No regrets." And beneath them, hidden in the duffel bag between his feet, $200,000 in stolen money rode quietly toward an uncertain future. The truck dropped them at the rest stop where their car sat buried under snow. The maintenance man helped Merritt dig it out, refusing payment, just saying, "We look after each other up here." By the time they got the car started and began the long drive home, it was past 8 at night. Merritt drove carefully, his hands tight on the wheel, the duffel bag with $200,000 hidden in the back seat under an old blanket. Beside him, Opal was quiet, staring out at the darkness beyond the headlights. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That we just crossed a line we can't uncross," she said softly. "Regrets?" She turned to look at him, her face half in shadow. "No, but fear. Lots of fear." They didn't talk much after that. The drive took 3 hours, and by the time they pulled into the driveway of their small house on the edge of Billings, Montana, they were both exhausted. The house looked exactly as they'd left it 4 days ago, though it felt like 4 years. The porch light was still on. The newspaper from Tuesday sat soggy on the steps. Merritt carried the duffel bag inside like it weighed nothing and everything at once. Opal went straight to the bathroom, and he heard her opening the medicine cabinet, heard her small cry of frustration. "What's wrong?" She appeared in the doorway holding an empty pill bottle. "I thought I had a backup prescription. I forgot I used it last month." One pill left in the bottle from the cabin, maybe 12 hours of protection for her heart. Merritt set down the duffel bag and unzipped it. He pulled out one bundle of $100 bills, $10,000, and held it out to her. "Get dressed. We're going to the 24-hour pharmacy." At 11:30 at night, they stood at the pharmacy counter while a tired pharmacist filled Opal's prescription. She tried not to look at Merritt as he counted out 45 crisp $100 bills for her medication. The pharmacist raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Do you have any idea how much you need for the year?" Merritt asked quietly as they walked back to the car. Opal did the math in her head. "About $5,000, maybe 6 with doctor visits." He thought about the money in the duffel bag. They had $190,000 left. Enough for 5 years of her medication and the mortgage and food and heat and every basic necessity. Enough to stop drowning, but not enough to quiet the voice in his head that said they'd stolen it. They got home after midnight and fell into bed without undressing. Merritt wrapped himself around Opal and felt her breathing, steady now with her medication properly dosed. Outside their bedroom window, Billings slept, ordinary and oblivious. And $300 million sat hidden in a cabin 4 hours north, waiting like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Morning came too bright and too fast. Merritt woke to his phone ringing, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Is this Merritt Davies?" A man's voice, professional, clipped. "Who's asking?" "My name is Vaughn Ridgemont. I believe you recently visited a cabin that belonged to my Uncle Ellis. I'd like to discuss its contents with you." Merritt's blood went cold. He sat up carefully, trying not to wake Opal. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Davies, The county maintenance man who drove you down the mountain is a friend of mine. He mentioned an elderly couple took shelter in a cabin on Milner Road. That's my uncle's cabin. It's been in my family for 40 years, and I think we both know what you found there." Merritt's mind raced. "We didn't take anything." "I'm not accusing you of anything, I just want to talk. I've been looking for that cabin for a very long time. My uncle died before he could tell anyone where it was. If you could just tell me the exact location, I'll make it worth your while." "How did you get my number?" "Your car was still registered at the rest stop. Montana plates, not hard to track down." Vaughn paused. "Mr. Davies, I'm not your enemy. My uncle stole that money, yes, but he had his reasons. It's been missing for almost 40 years. I just want to recover what's left and close this chapter. Can we meet? Talk like civilized people?" Merritt looked at Opal, who was awake now, watching him with worried eyes. "I need to think about it." "Please do. I'll call back tomorrow. And Mr. Davies, I should mention that I'm not the only person looking for that cabin. There are others who want what's inside. Others who won't be as friendly about asking." The line went dead. Merritt set down the phone with shaking hands. Opal sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Who was that?" he told her. When he finished, she was pale but composed. "He knows. He suspects. Same thing." She climbed out of bed, went to the closet, pulled out the duffel bag. "We have two choices. We can give him the location, tell him about the money, and hope he believes we only took this much. Or we can deny everything and hope he goes away." "There's a third choice," Merritt said quietly. "What?" "We go back. We deal with the rest of the money ourselves. We figure out the right thing to do with it before people like Vaughn Ridgemont get their hands on it." Opal stared at him. "Merritt, we barely survived up there. You want to go back?" "I want to finish what we started. We took 200,000 and left 300 million. That was a decision made in panic. Now we have time to think, to plan. If we're going to be responsible for this, we need to do it right." She sat on the edge of the bed, processing. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but we do this smart. We bring supplies, warm clothes, food, and we bring Ellis's journal and documents. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." They spent the day preparing. Merritt withdrew $5,000 from an ATM using one of the stolen bills exchanged at a check-cashing place, bought supplies at 3 different stores so no one would notice the quantity. Sleeping bags, propane heater, food, water, flashlights, batteries. He felt like he was preparing for a siege, because maybe he was. By evening, they were packed and ready. Merritt looked at their house, this place they'd fought so hard to keep, and wondered if they'd see it again. Then he helped Opal into the car, and they drove north as the sun set behind them. They reached the cabin just after 10 at night. Merritt had memorized the route, and even in darkness, he found it. The snow had melted more in the past 2 days, but there was still enough to make the final approach difficult. He parked a quarter-mile down the road and they hiked in, carrying their supplies. The cabin sat dark and silent, the door still broken from when Merritt had kicked it in. They went inside, and Merritt immediately set about securing it better. He found boards in the shed out back and nailed them across the door, creating a barricade that could be opened from inside but would be harder to breach from outside. Opal got the fire going and set up their camp. They'd brought real food this time: bread, cheese, canned stew, coffee. As they ate by the firelight, the cabin felt less like a tomb and more like a refuge. "So what's the plan?" Opal asked. Merritt pulled out Ellis Ridgemont's journal, which he'd taken on their first exit. "We read everything. We understand what we're dealing with, and then we decide who to give it to and on what terms." They spent hours going through the journal, reading entry after entry. Ellis Ridgemont emerged as a complicated man, angry at the system that had chewed up and spit out his father, smart enough to beat it, and guilty enough to document everything. In a passage dated June 6, 1985, he wrote, "Saw Jerry Patterson at the market today. Used to work with my dad. Told me Carnegie cut his pension by 60%. He's 73 and bagging groceries. I asked him why he didn't sue. He said the company has lawyers. He has nothing. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Not for me, for every Jerry Patterson out there." Opal's eyes filled with tears. He was trying to be Robin Hood. "Robin Hood died running away," Merritt said, "and his treasure sat useless for 40 years. They found a list near the back of the journal, names of people Ellis had researched, victims of Carnegie Financial's pension cuts. There were addresses, some crossed out, notes like deceased or moved unknown. It was a hit list of guilt, people Ellis had wanted to make amends to but never got the chance. "This is it," Opal said, holding the list. "This is who gets the money back. These people and their families." Merritt nodded slowly. "But how? We can't just show up at people's houses with bundles of cash." "No, but we can work with someone who can. A lawyer maybe, or a foundation, someone who can distribute it properly." She looked at him. "We keep enough to survive. The rest goes here to these people. That's justice. That's right." They were still discussing logistics when Merritt heard it, the same sound from before, an engine in the distance growing closer. He moved to the window and looked out. Headlights, 2 sets, coming up the road. "We have company," he said. Opal stood, her face tight with fear. "Vaughn?" "Probably." They watched as 2 vehicles pulled up, a black SUV and a sedan. 4 people got out, 3 men and a woman. One of the men was young, maybe 40, wearing an expensive jacket and boots that had never seen real work. He looked around the cabin with an expression of triumph. "That's got to be Vaughn," Merritt muttered. The woman was older, 60 maybe, with steel grey hair and a government look about her. She wore a practical coat and carried herself with authority. Vaughn walked toward the cabin, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Mr. Davies, I know you're in there. I just want to talk. I'm not here to hurt you." Merritt looked at Opal. She nodded. He moved to the barricaded door and called through it. "Who's with you?" "Associates. People who have an interest in this property." Vaughn came closer. "Please, can we come in? It's freezing out here and we've been driving for hours." Against his better judgment, Merritt pulled away the boards and opened the door. Vaughn stepped inside first, followed by his 2 associates, large men who looked like hired muscle. The woman came last, and up close Merritt could see she was older than he'd thought, maybe 65, with sharp eyes that took in everything. "Thank you," Vaughn said, warming his hands. His eyes swept the cabin, lingering on the floor, on the fireplace. "So this is it, Uncle Ellis's great hiding place." "Who are you really?" Merritt asked. Vaughn smiled, all charm and no warmth. "I told you, Ellis Ridgemont was my uncle. Well, technically my father's brother. I was 10 when he died. My father spent the rest of his life obsessed with finding this place, finding the money Ellis stole. It destroyed him, destroyed our whole family. Your uncle stole the money because Carnegie Financial destroyed his family first," Opal said quietly. Vaughn's smile faltered. "You've read his journal?" "Cover to cover." "Then you know he was a thief. A clever one, but a thief." Vaughn looked around again. "Where is it? The money?" "Under the floor," Merritt said. "No point lying now. About $300 million, give or take." One of the hired men whistled low. Vaughn's eyes lit up with greed so naked it was almost funny. $300 million, Vaughn breathed. "Jesus, my father always said it was at least 200. "Your father knew?" Opal asked. "He suspected. Ellis sent him a letter before he ran, said he'd taken care of the family's future, said to look for the cabin in the mountains, but he never gave an exact location. Died before he could." Vaughn's voice grew harder. "We've been searching for 40 years, hired investigators, bought property records, followed every lead. and you two stumble onto it by accident." "Not accident," Merritt said. "Survival. We were freezing to death." That's when the woman spoke, her voice carrying authority that made everyone turn. "And that's the only reason you're not under arrest right now." Vaughn spun to face her. "Who the hell are you?" She pulled out a badge. "Special Agent Cressida Holloway, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. I've been investigating the Carnegie financial embezzlement for 37 years, and I've finally found what I've been looking for." The room went silent except for the crackle of the fire. Merritt felt his stomach drop. FBI. They were done. Finished. He looked at Opal and saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. Cressida put away her badge and looked at Vaughn. "Mr. Ridgemont, I've been following your search for this cabin for the past 5 years. Every property record you pulled, every investigator you hired, I tracked. I figured you'd eventually lead me here, so thank you." Vaughn's face went red. "You used me?" "I used resources. You were one of them." She turned to Merritt and Opal. "And you two, the elderly couple who took shelter from a storm, very convenient story." "It's the truth," Merritt said, his voice steady despite his fear. Cressida studied them, and Merritt saw her eyes take in Opal's medication bottle sitting on the table, the worn quality of their clothes, the way they stood together like they were each other's only protection against the world. "Maybe it is," she said finally. "But you took money from this cabin. The maintenance man reported you were carrying a heavy duffel bag when he drove you down." Merritt didn't deny it. "We took what we needed to survive. 200,000. Left the rest." 200,000, Vaughn laughed bitterly. "That's all? Out of 300 million? "We're not greedy," Opal said, her voice sharp. "We just didn't want to die." Cressida crossed her arms. "Do you have any idea where that money came from? What it represents?" "Pension funds," Merritt said. "Ellis's journal explains everything. Carnegie Financial stole from their own workers. Ellis stole it back, not for himself. He was planning to return it." "He was planning to disappear to Mexico," Cressida corrected. "The restitution story is nice, but Ellis Ridgemont was a criminal. A smart one, but a criminal." "Like Carnegie Financial," Opal said, "except they never got arrested." Cressida's expression shifted slightly. "You're not wrong. Carnegie Financial restructured in 1992, paid minimal fines, and executives kept their bonuses. The workers whose pensions Ellis stole from, most of them died without seeing a dime of restitution. So the money just disappeared," Merritt said. "Until now." Cressida looked at the floor. 300 million could finally go back to victims, their families, people who deserve it. "That's what we want too," Opal said. "That's why we came back. Not to take more, but to figure out the right thing to do with what's here." Vaughn laughed again, a sharp, bitter sound. "You're all insane. That money is mine by right. Ellis was my uncle. My family suffered because of what he did. We lost everything. Our house, our savings, my father's business, all seized by the government looking for Ellis's money. That fortune under the floor is compensation for what we went through." "Your family suffered," Cressida said coldly. "But so did the pension holders Ellis stole from. They have more right to this money than you do." "I disagree." Vaughn's voice went hard. "And I've got lawyers who'll tie this up for years. You want a legal battle? I'll give you one." The tension in the room ratcheted up. Merritt could feel violence building, could see it in the way Vaughn's hired men shifted their weight, in the way Cressida's hand moved toward her coat pocket where he'd bet she had a gun. Then Opal gasped. Her hand flew to her chest, her face going white. Merritt was at her side in an instant, catching her as her knees buckled. "Opal, can't breathe," she wheezed. "Merritt, I can't." He lowered her to the floor, cradling her head. Her lips were turning blue, her breathing shallow and ragged. Heart attack. He'd seen this before, 3 years ago when she'd had her first one. "Her medication!" he shouted. "In the duffel bag, someone get it!" Cressida moved first, grabbing the bag, finding the pill bottle. She brought it to Merritt, her professional composure cracking to show genuine concern. Merritt got a pill into Opal's mouth, helped her swallow it with water. "We need to get her to a hospital," Cressida said. "Nearest one is an hour away," Vaughn said, "and the road's barely passable." "Then we make it passable." Cressida looked at Vaughn's men. "You two, get the SUV turned around. We're taking her down now." They moved without question, responding to the authority in her voice. Vaughn stood frozen, watching Opal struggle to breathe. Merritt held his wife, whispering to her, telling her to stay with him, that she'd be okay, that he loved her. Tears streamed down his weathered face, and for the first time Vaughn's expression shifted. The greed melted away, replaced by something human. He'd been so focused on the money, on his family's suffering, that he'd forgotten other people were suffering too. "My mother had a heart condition," he said quietly. "Died when I was 16. I watched her go through exactly what your wife is going through now." Merritt looked up at him, seeing past the expensive clothes to the scared kid underneath. "Then you know we need to get her help. Now." Vaughn nodded. "My SUV's bigger, more stable. We'll take mine." They worked together, all animosity temporarily forgotten in the face of real crisis. Merritt carried Opal to the SUV. Cressida grabbed their supplies. Vaughn's men cleared snow from the road ahead with shovels from the cabin's shed. Within 10 minutes, they were moving down the mountain, Vaughn driving with surprising skill. Merritt in the back holding Opal, Cressida in the passenger seat on her phone coordinating with the hospital in Billings. "They're prepping for a cardiac patient," she said. "They'll be ready when we get there." Opal's breathing had stabilized slightly, the medication working, but she was weak and pale. Merritt held her against his chest and felt every one of his 78 years pressing down on him. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her. "I'm so sorry I brought you back here." She managed to shake her head slightly. "Not your fault. We're together. That's what matters." Behind them, the cabin sat in darkness, $300 million hidden under its floor, temporarily forgotten in the face of something more valuable, a human life hanging in the balance. They made it to the hospital in 53 minutes, Vaughn pushing the SUV as fast as he dared on the treacherous roads. Orderlies met them with a wheelchair, whisked Opal away to cardiac care. Merritt tried to follow, but a nurse stopped him gently. "Let us work, sir. You can see her soon." He stood in the emergency room hallway, lost and terrified, until Cressida guided him to a chair. "Sit. You're no good to her if you collapse." He sat. Vaughn hovered nearby, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Thank you," Merritt said to him, "for driving." Vaughn shrugged. "Couldn't let her die. I'm greedy, not a monster." Cressida sat beside Merritt. "She's going to be okay. These doctors are good." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it." She paused. "Merritt, can I ask you something? Why did you really go back to that cabin?" He looked at her, this Fed who'd chased Ellis Ridgemont's money for most of her career, and decided to tell the truth. Because taking that $200,000 didn't feel right. It felt like stealing. We wanted to figure out how to return the rest properly, to make sure it went to people who deserved it, not just back to some corporation or government warehouse. Cressida studied him. "You broke into federal evidence, took money, and came back to return it." "We didn't know it was evidence. We were freezing to death, but yes, basically." She shook her head slowly. "In 37 years, I've dealt with hundreds of criminals. Not one ever came back to make things right." "We're not criminals," Merritt said. "We're just two old people who made a choice to survive. By stealing. By taking what we needed and leaving the rest. There's a difference." Vaughn spoke up. "Is there? You took 200,000. I want to take 300 million. Same crime, different scale." Not the same. Opal's voice came from behind them, weak but clear. They turned to see a nurse wheeling her out, an IV in her arm, color returning to her face. Merritt and I took enough to survive. You want to take enough to be rich. Intent matters. Merritt rushed to her side. You shouldn't be out of bed. They're keeping me overnight for observation, but I'm stable. Wanted to tell you myself. She looked at Cressida and Vaughn. And I wanted to finish this conversation, about the money, about what's right. Cressida raised an eyebrow. You just had a heart episode and you want to talk about $300 million? It's why we went back. Might as well finish it. Opal's voice was tired but determined. She looked at Vaughn. You said your family suffered. I believe you. Ellis's crimes had ripples, but so did Carnegie Financial's, and those ripples are still hitting people 40 years later. So what are you proposing? Vaughn asked. That we all go back to that cabin tomorrow after I'm released, and we make a decision together about what happens to that money. Not based on greed or revenge or even justice, based on what will help the most people. Merritt squeezed her hand. Opal, you need rest. I need this finished, Merritt. We all do. She looked at Cressida. You've been chasing this for 37 years. You deserve to be part of the decision. And Vaughn, you grew up with the shadow of Ellis's crime. You deserve to be heard too. And us? We stumbled into this mess, but we're here now. So let's figure it out together. The hallway was quiet for a long moment. Then Cressida nodded slowly. Okay, tomorrow. We go back together and we decide. Vaughn hesitated, then nodded too. Fine, but I reserve the right to fight for my family's claim. As long as you fight fair, Opal said. They helped her back to her room, got her settled, made sure she had everything she needed. Merritt refused to leave her side, even when nurses said visiting hours were over. They brought him a chair and he slept sitting up, holding her hand, like he had every night for 53 years. Morning came with weak winter light. Opal was discharged with new medication and strict instructions to avoid stress. Merritt almost laughed. Avoid stress while deciding what to do with $300 million in stolen money. Sure, no problem. They met Vaughn and Cressida in the hospital parking lot. The drive back to the cabin was tense and quiet, everyone lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, the place looked exactly as they'd left it, frozen and waiting. Inside, they built up the fire and sat around it like some strange war council. Merritt pulled up the floorboards and they all stared at the bundles of cash. So much money, it didn't look real. Okay, Cressida said finally. Let's hear proposals. Vaughn, you first. He took a breath. My family deserves compensation. My father died trying to find this money. It consumed his life. I'm not asking for all of it, just a percentage. 10%, 30 million. The rest can go to whatever victims you want. 10%, Opal repeated. That's $30 million for your suffering. What about the pension holders who lost everything? They'll get $270 million, Vaughn shot back. Seems fair to me. Cressida shook her head. The government will claim this money as recovered stolen goods. It'll go into federal custody, be distributed through official channels. Official channels that take years and eat half of it in administrative costs, Merritt said. We've read about these things. By the time it gets to anyone who needs it, it'll be nickels and dimes. So, what's your proposal? Cressida challenged. Merritt looked at Opal. She nodded, giving him strength. He pulled out Ellis Ridgemont's journal and opened to the list of names near the back. Ellis kept a list. Victims of Carnegie Financial's pension cuts. People he wanted to help. Some are dead now, but they have families. We find those families and we give them the money directly. Set up a trust, hire a good lawyer, distribute it properly. Vaughn gets enough to feel compensated, maybe $5 million. The government gets its cut for recovering it, maybe $5 million. And the rest, $295 million, goes to the people Ellis hurt. That's fraud, Cressida said. Distribution without government oversight. That's justice, Opal corrected. Government oversight is why these people never got their money back in the first place. Carnegie Financial paid minimal fines and the victims got nothing. You said so yourself. Cressida was quiet for a long time, staring at the fire. When she spoke, her voice was softer. I became an agent because I believed in the system. Believed if you worked hard and followed the rules, justice would happen. But I've spent 37 years watching white-collar criminals walk free while regular people suffer. Maybe you're right. Maybe the system is broken. So break the rules, Opal said gently. Just this once. For the right reasons. Vaughn laughed, but it wasn't bitter this time. The FBI agent becomes a criminal. That's rich. Not a criminal, Cressida said. A person making a choice. There's a difference. She looked at Merritt and Opal. But if we do this, we do it smart. Legal framework, proper documentation, everything above board as much as possible. I know people, lawyers who specialize in restitution. We can make this work. And my $5 million? Vaughn asked. You get it, Merritt said, but you have to help. You have resources, connections. Help us find Ellis's victims and their families. Help us make this right. Vaughn considered, then slowly nodded. Okay, $5 million and I help make things right. Deal. They shook hands, this unlikely alliance of an elderly couple, a greedy heir, and an FBI agent who'd finally found what she'd been chasing her whole career. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and clean, covering the world in white. And in a cabin in the Montana mountains, 4 people who should have been enemies began planning how to distribute $300 million to the people who deserved it most. The work began the next morning. Cressida made calls to lawyers she trusted, people who'd spent careers fighting for the little guy against corporate machines. Vaughn used his resources to hire investigators who could track down the families on Ellis's list. Merritt and Opal became the heart of the operation, reading through Ellis's notes, cross-referencing names, building a picture of who deserved restitution. This is the most elaborate off-book operation I've ever run, she said one night over coffee. If this goes wrong, I lose my pension. If it goes right, Opal said gently, you give dozens of people theirs back. By the end of the second week, they had a list. 47 families whose pensions had been gutted by Carnegie Financial between 1983 and 1986. Some of the original victims had died, but they had children, grandchildren, people who'd grown up in the shadow of financial ruin caused by corporate greed. Merritt looked at the names and saw his own story reflected back. Workers who'd done everything right and still lost everything. Families destroyed by systems that protected the wealthy and abandoned everyone else. This is who we're fighting for, he said, spreading the papers across the table. Every single one of them deserves to know someone finally cared. My father would have wanted this, he said quietly. Underneath all his obsession, he was a good man who hated injustice. Maybe this is how I honor him. The first distribution happened on a cold March morning. Merritt and Opal drove to Spokane, Washington, to meet Claire Patterson, the daughter of Jerry Patterson, the man Ellis had mentioned in his journal, the one bagging groceries at 73. Claire was 62 now, living in a small apartment, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. When they knocked on her door, she answered with the wary expression of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. Who's asking? My name is Opal Davies. This is my husband Merritt. We're with the Ridgemont Restitution Trust. We have something that belongs to your family. They sat in her tiny living room, surrounded by photographs of Jerry Patterson in his younger days, proud and strong in his work clothes. Claire listened as they explained about Ellis Ridgemont, the embezzlement, the money found after 40 years. Your father was owed approximately $200,000 in pension benefits that were stolen, Merritt said. We're here to return it, with interest. $450,000. Claire stared at them like they were speaking a foreign language. That's not possible. Opal pulled out a cashier's check and placed it on the coffee table. It's possible, and it's real. Your father deserved this. You deserve this. We're sorry it took so long. Claire picked up the check with trembling hands. Tears spilled down her cheeks. My dad died thinking he'd failed us. He worked 43 years and died with nothing. I've been working since I was 14 trying to make up for what we lost. You didn't fail, Merritt said, his own voice thick. The system failed you. We're just trying to make a small piece of it right. They stayed for 2 hours, listening to Claire talk about her father, about growing up poor because a corporation had stolen their future, about the shame and struggle and endless work. When they finally left, Claire hugged them both, sobbing into Opal's shoulder. You gave me back more than money, she whispered. You gave me back my father's dignity. It was the first of 47 visits. Each one was different. Each one was the same. They met children and grandchildren of workers Ellis had documented. They sat in living rooms and kitchens, listened to stories of hardship and survival, and handed over checks that represented justice delayed but finally delivered. This won't bring him back, he said. No, Merritt agreed. But maybe it'll let you rest easier. Maybe you can stop carrying his pain and start building something new. Opal moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in her weathered one. We do understand, more than you know. We've lost people too, and we've spent years wondering if different choices would have changed things. But Thomas, your father's death wasn't about money. It was about a system that crushed him until he couldn't see any way out. What we're giving you isn't just compensation. It's proof that what happened to your family mattered, that it was wrong, that someone finally cares enough to make it right. Thomas held onto her hand like a drowning man clutching a rope. I've been so angry for so long. You had every right to be, Merritt said. But maybe now you can let some of that anger go. Not forget it, but transform it into something that would have made your father proud. 6 months later, Thomas sent them a photograph. He'd opened a crisis counseling center for men struggling with financial stress and depression, funded entirely by his restitution money. The sign above the door read Patterson Center after his father. You were right, his note said. I transformed the anger. Thank you for showing me how. In Portland, they met the Rodriguez family, 3 generations crammed into a 2-bedroom house, all working multiple jobs. The grandmother, Maria, had been a secretary at Carnegie Financial, lost everything when the company restructured. When they gave her family $520,000, Maria fell to her knees and prayed in Spanish, thanking God and Santos and these 2 strange angels who'd appeared at her door. But it was Maria's 15-year-old great-granddaughter, Isabel, who stopped Merritt and Opal as they were leaving. Why did you do this? She asked in barely accented English. You don't know us. You could have kept this money. Opal knelt down to the girl's level, ignoring the protest from her arthritic knees. Because Isabel, when I was about your age, my family lost everything too. Different reasons, but same result. I watched my mother cry herself to sleep worrying about money. I watched my father work 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone else not feel that way, I would. This is me keeping that promise. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. Because of you, I can go to college. I can be the first one in my family. No, Opal corrected gently. You'll go to college because you're smart and determined. We just removed one barrier. You'll remove the rest yourself. 5 years later, Isabel graduated from Oregon State with a degree in social work. She invited Merritt and Opal to the ceremony. They sat in the audience, 2 elderly people among hundreds, and watched Isabel walk across that stage. Afterward, Isabel introduced them to everyone as the angels who changed my family's life. We're not angels, Merritt said for the 100th time. Maybe not, Isabel replied, but you're the closest thing to them I've ever met. Each visit changed Merritt and Opal. They started as people delivering money, became witnesses to decades of suffering, and ended as something like healers. They listened, really listened, to stories that had been silenced by shame and poverty. They validated pain that had been dismissed by a system that protected the powerful. In Denver, they met a Vietnam veteran named Raymond Marsh, whose Carnegie pension had been slashed to almost nothing. He lived in a studio apartment with his disabled wife, surviving on Social Security and food stamps. When they gave him $390,000, he didn't cry. He just sat very still for a long time. "I fought for this country," he finally said. "Came home and worked honest my whole life, and they still took everything from me. I stopped believing justice existed." "It's slow," Merritt said, "and imperfect, but it exists. You're holding proof of it." "We would have known," Opal said simply, "and that would have been worse than having nothing." "We're not just giving them money," Opal said one night as they drove between cities. "We're telling them their suffering mattered, that they weren't forgotten." "Ellis tried to do this," Merritt said. "He just ran out of time." "We're finishing what he started. Maybe that's our purpose. Maybe this is why we survived that storm." By June, they'd distributed over $200 million to 47 families. The remaining money, minus Vaughan's share and government fees, went into a permanent trust that would provide ongoing support, education funds for grandchildren, medical care, housing assistance. Cressida structured it so tightly that no one could touch it except the designated families. Vaughan surprised them all by staying involved. His $5 million had given him security, but the work had given him purpose. He used his business connections to help families invest their money wisely, to avoid the pitfalls that could turn sudden wealth into new problems. "My Uncle Ellis was right about one thing," he told Merritt. "The system is rigged, but maybe we just rigged it back, just a little." Until August. Merritt was outside their house, tending the small garden Opal had planted with money from their share, when a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. His stomach clenched. He knew that vehicle. Dex climbed out, followed by Marlowe and Hadley. They looked uncomfortable, uncertain, like children caught doing something wrong and finally facing consequences. "Dad," Dex said, "we need to talk." Merritt set down his trowel and stood slowly. "About what?" So that's why they'd come. Merritt felt something harden in his chest. "What do you want?" His voice was cold. "We want to apologize," Hadley said, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. "What we did was wrong. We were stressed and made a terrible decision. But we're family. We should work through this." "You left us to die in a blizzard," Merritt said quietly. "Do you understand that? Your mother had a heart attack because of what you did. We could have frozen to death in that rest stop." "But you didn't," Dex said. "You found that cabin, found the money, and now you're distributing it to strangers when your own family could use help." There it was, the real reason. Merritt almost laughed. "You want money." "We want what's fair," Marlowe said. "We're your children. We deserve to be taken care of." "You deserve nothing from us," she said. "Mom," Hadley started. "No, you don't get to call me that. Mothers protect their children. Children honor their parents. You did neither." Opal's voice was steady, calm, final. "You calculated our worth and decided we were too expensive. You left us in a storm like we were garbage. The only reason we're alive is because we found shelter by chance and fortune by accident." "We made a mistake," Dex tried. Marlowe's face went red. "You're going to give millions to strangers, but nothing to your own kids." "Those strangers suffered through no fault of their own," Opal said. "You're suffering through every fault of your own. We're done enabling you. We're done sacrificing for people who don't appreciate it. Go build your own lives. We're finally building ours." "Fine, we'll sue. You abandoned us first, emotionally, always putting work before family. We'll take you to court and we'll win." "Try," Merritt said. "We have lawyers now, good ones, and we have documentation of what you did. Text messages, recordings, witnesses. Bring your lawsuit. We'll bring ours for elder abuse and abandonment." The color drained from Dex's face. They hadn't considered that their actions might have legal consequences. "You wouldn't," Hadley whispered. "Watch us," Opal said. "That hurt less than I thought it would," she said. "Because they stopped being our children the night they left us. We were just too loyal to admit it." Inside, the house felt lighter. They'd severed the last tie to people who'd only ever taken. Now they were free to choose their own family, and they did. Claire Patterson called every Sunday. Thomas Quinn sent photographs of the woodworking shop he'd opened with his restitution money, which had expanded into a full therapy workshop where men worked with their hands while processing their trauma. Maria Rodriguez invited them to family dinners where 3 generations thanked them in English and Spanish. These people, strangers 6 months ago, became the family Merritt and Opal had always deserved. Cressida came by weekly, bringing paperwork and staying for coffee that stretched into lunch. She'd become more than just the administrator of the trust. She'd become their closest friend, the daughter they'd never really had. "You two changed my life," she told them one afternoon. "I was so burnt out, so cynical. You reminded me why I became an agent in the first place, to help people." Vaughn stopped by monthly, always with stories about families he'd helped invest their money, people whose lives were transforming. He'd become a different person, the greed burned away by purpose. "I'm dating someone," he told them one visit. "A teacher. She doesn't care about my money. First time in my life I've felt that." And every single one of those families knew that an elderly couple named Merritt and Opal Davies had fought for them when no one else would. The media caught wind of the story eventually. Local news became national news. Producers called asking for interviews. Merritt and Opal turned down most of them, but they did one. Just one. On a morning show that focused on human interest stories, the interviewer asked the obvious question. "Why did you do this? You could have kept the money. No one would have known." Opal looked at Merritt, then back at the camera. "Because we know what it's like to have nothing, to work your whole life and still struggle. We couldn't keep money that belonged to people who'd suffered the way we had. It wouldn't have been ours. It would have been stolen. And we're not thieves. We're just 2 people who got lucky and decided to share the luck." Merritt shook his head. "Money can't fix betrayal, and giving it to them would have just rewarded bad behavior. The families we helped, they didn't choose their suffering. Our children chose theirs. There's a difference." Universities started using their story in ethics classes. Churches referenced them in sermons about stewardship. Schools brought them in to talk to students about character. Merritt and Opal, who'd lived invisible lives for 70-plus years, became symbols of something people had almost forgotten existed: true selflessness. But they didn't feel like heroes. They felt like people who'd simply made the only choice they could live with. They walked through the rooms that had saved their lives. The fireplace where they'd warmed themselves. The bedroom where Opal had nearly died. The floor where $300 million had waited for 40 years to do some good. "Hard to believe it's only been a year," Opal said. "Feels like a lifetime," Merritt agreed. Merritt thought about their old life, about struggling and sacrifice and children who'd thrown them away. Then he thought about their new life, about chosen family and purpose, and the knowledge that they'd helped people who desperately needed it. Their story spread beyond America. International news picked it up. People in countries they'd never heard of sent letters thanking them for restoring their faith in humanity. A filmmaker in Germany made a documentary. A novelist in Japan wrote a book inspired by their choice, and they all knew who to thank. Merritt and Opal spent their remaining years traveling to visit the families they'd helped. They attended graduations and weddings, met great-grandchildren named after them, saw businesses flourish and lives bloom. They watched their choice ripple outward in ways they'd never imagined. Opal's heart condition stabilized with proper medication and care. Merritt's arthritis got treatment they could finally afford. They weren't rich. The $200,000 they'd kept had dwindled to savings for emergencies, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were at peace. "We could have had $300 million, Opal said one night as they sat on their porch, watching stars emerge over Billings. "And been miserable," Merritt finished. "Money like that would have poisoned us, turned us into something we're not. What are we?" He looked at her, this woman he'd loved for over 50 years, who'd survived abandonment and blizzards and heart attacks, and still chose kindness. "Survivors," he said, "and maybe teachers. We showed people that you can find a fortune and still choose what's right." On their 80th and 78th birthdays, the families they'd helped threw them a massive celebration in Billings. Over 300 people showed up, representatives from all 47 families, plus Cressida and Vaughan and countless others whose lives had been touched by their choice. Thomas Quinn presented them with a handmade wooden plaque that read, "To Merritt and Opal Davies, who proved that the measure of wealth isn't what you have, but what you give away." Claire Patterson read a letter from the Patterson family, 43 members strong, all of whom owed their current stability to a choice two elderly people had made in a cabin 1 year ago. Merritt and Opal sat in the center of it all, overwhelmed and humbled. "We didn't do anything special," Opal kept saying. "That's what makes it special," Cressida replied. "You did what anyone could do, but almost no one would. You saw people suffering, and you ended some of that suffering. You didn't have to. You chose to. That's the definition of heroism." As the stars wheeled overhead, as the world spun on indifferent to their small lives, Merritt and Opal Davies sat together knowing they'd done something rare. They'd been given a choice between wealth and integrity, and they'd chosen integrity. They'd been abandoned by their children and found family in strangers. They'd taken nothing but survival and turned it into legacy. And in a small museum in the Montana mountains, visitors walked through a cabin where once upon a time 2 people found $300 million and gave almost all of it away. They read the plaques, looked at the photographs, and left changed by the simple truth that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't what you keep, but what you give. Because at the end of the day, Merritt and Opal Davies proved something the world needed to remember: that integrity costs nothing and means everything. That family is built not by blood, but by who shows up when life gets hard. That sometimes being abandoned by everyone you thought you knew just means you're free to find the people who'll actually love you back. They'd started with nothing, found everything, and chose to share it. Not because they were saints, but because they were human beings who understood suffering and decided to end some of it. Anyone can find money, but it takes real courage to give it to people who need it more than you do. It takes real strength to choose right over easy. It takes real love to build family from strangers and turn betrayal into purpose. Merritt and Opal Davies were just 2 elderly people who entered a cabin to escape a storm. But they left behind something that would weather every storm that followed. Proof that goodness still exists, that selflessness still matters, and that sometimes the people with the least give the most because they remember what it feels like to have nothing. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful true stories waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe integrity is worth more than wealth.